We're here with author and entrepreneur Stuart Cohen to talk about his company Invisible World Clothing. Good morning, Stuart, and how are things in Juneau, Alaska this morning?
Very snowy. There's high avalanche hazard warnings out right now.
That sounds like that could get exciting fast.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you this morning, how did the idea of selling all these amazing authentic clothes from around the world take shape?
Well, originally it was very simple. I was down in Ecuador, and I was I think I was 25 at the time, and I saw some sweaters in Otavalo, and I thought, gosh, if I could buy some of those sweaters and I could sell them in Alaska, and I could make enough money to come back here. And that's how it began, and that's still basically what we're doing.
Very cool. So it kind of facilitated your travels initially.
Yes, and it still does.
Was that the first product that you sold?
Yeah, the first product we sold were the sweaters from Otavalo, and they were, at that time they were very primitive. They've come a long way. At that time the dyes would run and that sort of thing, and gradually they've gotten much more sophisticated, and the quality has gotten really excellent and very uniform. And so we're still selling them, and actually we're selling them, I believe, for about the same amount that we were selling them for in 1984. Price has gone up and down, but, that's where it is now.
Well, that's amazingly rare these days.
Yeah, it is.
When did Invisible World come about, and what inspired you to start the company?
Well, one thing I will say is Invisible World never does anything just for the money. The decisions that we make in terms of how to getting into a product line and that sort of thing have to do with whether it'd be interesting to go there, whether it's a place we want to do business, and whether we're interested in those products.
Your company shares the same name as one of your novels. How did that come about?
Well, originally the business had a different name, but as we began dealing with more countries and doing more travel, the idea formed in my head that the things that we got, the products, which were from Bolivia and Peru and Inner Mongolia, places where people have heard of but have never been to, that these products formed a sort of map of an invisible world in people's imaginations. And that idea that sprang from all the travel for the business got reinforced in my mind and eventually became a novel called Invisible World, which explores that idea in depth. And I was fortunate with that. That was my first novel, and that came out in, was translated into 6 languages, and it's kind of all one. The store, the novel, life, it's all one.
I have to ask that traveling to all of these fascinating locations and exploring new cultures must be pretty amazing. Are you still able to enjoy these experiences while performing your business duty?
Oh, definitely. For one thing, we've been dealing with some of our suppliers for 25 years. So at this point, they're friends. Often I stay at their houses, and it's always interesting to go down and talk to people who are in business and talk to them about the economy and politics and those sorts of things. It's also fascinating to see what happens in these countries over time. And you might think going to the same places over and over again might become boring, but it's not, because it's sort of a different kind of tourism. It's being a tourist through time. And some of these countries, I've seen them go through 3 different currencies and many different governments, and it's just fascinating. As I said, basically I consider myself a tourist.
Well, I've got to travel a lot in my life, but never as extensively as you, so I doubt that I would ever find your adventures boring. Now, many consumers these days, they want to know that their purchases are creating a positive effect on the world and the people that are producing them. Your products are unique in that aspect. Tell us about the people who produce Invisible World products.
We deal with small family-owned companies all over the world, and we deal with a very wide variety of people. Some of our suppliers are Otavalan Indians in northern Ecuador that speak Quechua and Spanish. Others are Chinese yuppies, and others are American expatriates living in Bolivia, or sometimes wealthy South Americans. And so the money is going directly from us to the producers, and then it goes from them to the knitters and that sort of thing. In a business that requires a lot of skill, where you're using a lot of hand labor to make a complex product, which is what we're dealing with, You really can't mistreat your workers. You have to treat your workers well in order to keep them. So the people that we're working with generally are well paid on the scale of the countries that they are from, and often extremely well paid. So it's not like we're dealing with an agricultural product where labor is interchangeable. Because it's a complex, skilled labor, people tend to earn decent wages.
What sets the Invisible World products apart from department store clothes that you can get anywhere?
Invisible World's niche is exotic fibers from exotic places. That's how I think of it. And they're materials that aren't easy to find, such as alpaca and cashmere or hand-woven silk, and they usually have a lot of handwork. Department store clothes, on the other hand, tend to be more industrially produced.
Yeah, no question. Now, what kind of feedback do you get from your customers when they receive these garments from around the world?
I think usually people are very pleased. Occasionally you might have something that doesn't fit or something like that, but I think usually people are very pleasantly surprised, because Invisible World clothes, what we intend for them to be is kind of a link between the people who made them and the cultures that they come from, and then the people who end up buying them and wearing them. So usually people are delighted with them.
Very cool. Now, if we could, let's talk a little bit about alpaca. Mm-hmm. And I think your website probably gets the most attention right now for alpaca. It's a great fiber. Most of us are familiar with wool products, but maybe not alpaca. Share with us how you came to sell alpaca.
I was traveling in Peru, and I was basically in between buses in Lima, Peru. And I met a guy on the street who spoke to me in English. And I fell into conversation with him. And again, it was that same idea of, I'd like to do business here because then I could make enough money to come back. And so I said, hey, do you know any export? And he said, sure. And he, took me through a bunch of back alleys to this guy who had a line of very primitive, simple cashmere alpaca garments. And I started dealing with that guy. And that's how I started dealing with alpaca.
Boy, the back alley story, it kind of brings home to me that, when you're traveling to all these foreign countries, you're not in America. You're actually in a different place. Do you feel safe and secure all the time when you're traveling to these exotic locations?
Now I do. There were times when things were different. Peru, that first trip to Peru and for the next, that was like 1984. From 84 to 92, Peru was convulsed with a very, very violent insurgency from the Sendero Luminoso and the Tupac Amaru. And I think a couple 100,000 people were killed on both sides. And that was scary. I'd be in Lima, and you just sit in Lima and you listen to the bombs go off, 4 or 5 bombs every night. And there was a lot of crime, and it was kind of spooky sometimes. So things in those days, everything was a lot harder. Communications, there were no fax machines. There were making a telephone call cost $3 or $4 a minute, and so when you were down there, you're kind of on your own and a lot more isolated than you are now from home. Now I can turn on my computer and put on Skype and talk to my wife and look at her face, and it's a lot different.
Well, kudos to you for looking past that temporary strife that they had and bringing home some great products. When you were traveling down there, what else did you find unique about that culture and the people that you think Invisible World customers might find interesting?
When we're talking about Bolivia and Peru, we're actually talking about a lot of different cultures. You have the Andean cultures, you have Aymara people and Quechua people, people on the Altiplano and people that are in other areas that are just mountainous but not Altiplano. And then you have people who live in the cities and who might be very sophisticated, like one of my suppliers, the people who make the reversible baby alpaca sweaters are, it's an older couple. They're very sophisticated. He was in the Navy for a lot of his career, and then this is his second career. And, very genteel and kind people. And it's fascinating to hear them talk about, their culture and their experiences, living in Lima, Peru. But this is entirely different from someone who, for example, in Ecuador, who's an Otavalan Indian and who speaks Quechua, and who who has maybe one of my suppliers has a sixth grade education, and it's just fascinating. But both of them are very astute people, and I just find it endlessly interesting to hear people talk about their world, which is so different from my world.
I find it endlessly interesting too, and I really thank you for sharing this with all of us. Now, in talking about the alpaca and its similarity to wool, how is alpaca different from wool as a clothing fiber?
Alpaca comes from a different animal. An alpaca is in the American camel family, and it has a much longer fiber. So alpaca, when it's knit up or woven, is much stronger than wool. It doesn't pill, it's very warm, and it has a beautiful kind of silkiness to it. It's a little bit glossier than wool. I can always spot an alpaca sweater when people are wearing it, just from looking at it. It has a little bit different look.
Now here's your favorite question again. What's your favorite Invisible World alpaca product?
Oh, I really like our selection of hats. We have probably a dozen styles. Some of them are reversible, and those are really great. But I think my favorite right now is the reversible baby alpaca sweaters. They're just a really cool product. They're beautiful on either side. So it's like getting two sweaters in one, and they're a very fine gauge alpaca, so they're not too heavy. I just think they're a really neat product.
Very cool. Well, I've get a lot of good holiday gift ideas from this, so I'm looking forward to visiting that section of the website. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Once again, Stuart, we appreciate you sharing your knowledge, experiences, and yourself with all of us. That was author and entrepreneur Stuart Cohen, founder of the online clothing store Invisible World. You can see all of these great clothing products and Stuart's novels at invisibleworld.com.